Hey yo, I'm Cool Hand Lex and I'm back with Deckademics DJing Production School to nerd out with you today. In front of me is the Rane 72 and the Pioneer S11, two of the baddest, most technologically advanced DJ mixers the world has ever seen. My goal here is to take a more conceptual look at how these mixers are designed and how that design translates to real world use. This isn't a point-by-point review or an exhaustive look at any one set of functions, so there's plenty of videos out there to show you how everything works if you're looking for the tutelage. I'll largely be speaking in terms of use for you, which is to say us as the collective DJ community, but I will proffer some of my own thoughts and personal opinions along the way. If you've been considering putting one of these in the booth, hopefully this will help you decide which way to go. I should note that with the most recent firmware and updates, the original Rane 72 and Mark II are effectively identical mixers in terms of software and integration, and differ in hardware only in the fader section. So everything I say about the 72 applies to both unless otherwise noted. I have the OG version with me today, and with that as our baseline, let's dive in. Okay, so first things first. At the most basic level, each mixer has 2 channels, a touchscreen, 3 faders, and some effects. Both have excellent phono preamps for all your vinyl, and if you want to play tunes through software, they're fully integrated and designed for use with Serato DJ Pro. The S11 is also fully fledged for Pioneer's own record box software, which is huge and shouldn't be understated. So if we just drink in these beauties for a moment, we'll begin to see some considerable design differences. By the numbers, the Rane has 28 knobs on the face, where the Pioneer only has 20. Not to be outdone, the Pioneer slaps a whopping 39 buttons on there compared to 35 on the Rane. Both have a beautiful 4.3-inch touchscreen, and we'll get to what happens on that screen later, but it's what's happening around those screens that really separate these two. The S11 screen is flanked at the top by 2 black output knobs, and at the bottom with black tap and beat subdivision buttons. Visually, it's clean and uncluttered. When you're looking at the screen, it retains your focus. By contrast, the 72 screen is surrounded by an army of 10 white effects buttons that light up blue or orange when activated, with 4 black encoders and 2 blue depth knobs rounding out the view. This is really visually busy, and it means that you can't look at the screen without having to also inventory your current state of effects, if only subconsciously. I personally keep my effects use to a low roar, and never have I ever had the need to stack 4 effects together at once on top of a track. But I imagine if I did, I'd want the status of that cacophony at center stage in order to keep it properly managed. The S11 packages its effects buttons into 2 groups of 6 placed off to the bottom right and bottom left of the screen. Both mixers have vertically stacked channel strips with trim, EQ, and filter pots. The number of times I need to change my source on any given set will typically fit on a single finger, so I prefer the offset selectors on the Pioneer since it helps pull the line of pots up and away from the effects paddles. Rane has managed to squeeze the level meters into the respective channel strips up here, but they're all spaced out across the top. Having the meters next to the gains makes sense relationally, but in practice, monitoring them requires your focus to shift and scan across the entire width of the board. With the S11, all the meters are placed together between the channel faders, which still makes sense relationally and delivers all the information at a single point of focus. The 72 does have a meter for the mic, which is nice, though probably unneeded in most applications. Both mixers have the effects pedals centered below the screen, with similar pad and fader sections in the lower half. The Pioneer has sampler and monitor controls on the upper edges of the fader area, which does give the Rane a slightly smoother area in which to work, but both fader sections are wide open, so I mention it as a difference, not as any sort of inconvenience. In fact, having all the monitoring in its own little place away from other controls develops muscle memory since it's being continuously used and there's no nearby controls to create confusion. The 72 does have split Q, which is important to a lot of DJs. The S11 does not. Other workflow differences include a dedicated hardware loop section on the S11, while the 72 makes looping into a pad mode. At this stage in the game, loop control is a fundamental aspect of digital DJing, and having dedicated buttons means you can use the pad modes in conjunction with a loop, not in place of it. The Rane has 2 mic channels with controls on the face and the front. The S11 only has 1 with controls on the front. Library browsing is its own 2-button, 1 encoder section on the sides of the S11, while the 72 has 1 button and 1 encoder per channel, placed directly next to an identical encoder used to control software effects. And so, after noodling around on these mixers for a while, one thing became apparent to me, if it wasn't already to you, and that's the design of these 2 layouts stem from a different place fundamentally. On one hand, the S11 has all of its controls grouped together by function, where the 72 has all of its controls placed in terms of signal flow. With the Pioneer, input and output volume controls are placed all together up and out of the way. Looping, browsing, and monitoring take their own little residencies across the board, and effects controls are all grouped together in a band across the middle. With the 72, layout moves from left to right, with auxiliary audio input controls on the left, channel strips and effects in the center, and output controls along the right. This kind of layout is reminiscent of console-style mixers found in recording studios, and is of great benefit when the signal path of many sources needs to be easily understood, case in point, the effects section. But when you only have a couple audio channels to deal with, this layout can introduce inefficiencies, like placing volume control knobs all over the board and splitting the session pods, and putting channel Q buttons in the center of the mixer by the faders, with the rest of the monitoring controls away and next up channel 2's EQ and filter pods. I think this all boils down to one thing, and that's intuitiveness. The S11 looks and feels intuitive. The most important functions are on the face and have dedicated buttons and knobs. Everything is grouped and arranged by function, and no sections feel crowded or stuffed in next to another set of controls. The 72, on the other hand, was not intuitive to me, and I've yet to talk to another DJ that didn't feel the same way, at least initially. And every 72 owner told me the same thing. Other DJs don't feel comfortable on the 72 if they haven't already taken the time to learn it. But once they do learn it, they absolutely love it. Now, prior to this deep dig, I was that DJ. I would never request a different mixer if the 72 was what was in the booth, but my use was rudimentary at best, and I was uncomfortable for at least the first few minutes of my set, even if a DJ had never seen the Pioneer S11 or its predecessor. Everything is so well organized and grouped that within moments of encountering the mixer for the first time, all the important controls are quickly located and efficiently executed. The 72 layout isn't bad, I just don't feel like it's really optimized, and as such, it takes significantly longer to learn and develop the kind of muscle memory that you really want with a mixer. I think all these layout and workflow characteristics can be acutely showcased by a single design choice on these pieces. On the S11, text is printed on the actual control wherever possible and practical. All of the text on the 72 is printed on the faceplate, which muddies up a lot of the negative space between controls. This means it takes a longer, more concerted thought to execute each task, if only momentarily. But all those split-second shifts of focus really add up over the course of a set, and at least anecdotally, serve as a roadblock to instigating an initial desire to learn and want to use the mixer. But, and this is the biggest of buts here, almost everything I just described is simply my opinion. There's absolutely nothing about where buttons and knobs are placed that makes a DJ mixer sound or perform any better or any worse than another. Though these mixers don't have a very similar physical layout, their general feature sets are far more comparable. They're so similar, in fact, that it'll save us a lot of time just to look at the key differences. The first thing to note is build quality. The Rane 72 is made of cold hard steel and built like a tank, while the Pioneer S11 is almost all plastic. The footprints are nearly identical in height and length, with the 72 spanning about 3/4 of an inch wider. The all-metal construction and slightly wider span puts the 72 at just over half a pound heavier, which is negligible in most cases, I think. Where the build quality really shows itself is after years of use, or just after dropping it once. The plastic build of the S11 should be of little consequence in the vast majority of applications and accidents, but the metal build of the 72 all but guarantees it. There's really only one big difference in terms of the ins and outs between these two, and that's with the USB hub. They both can control CDJs, 12s, and controllers just fine, but only the S11 has the 5-volt output needed to power phase directly through the hub. Features like Silent Q are available as a type of pad mode on the S11, while the parameter buttons on the 72 can be used to do Silent Q, sync, and instant doubles, and even has a custom mapping available. S11 has its own way of doing those things, of course, and most of the other feature differences show up when we start to get into the specific sections of the mixers, like the screens and faders, with the exception of two rather notable features that, as of the creation of this video, are exclusive to the S11. The first is Smooth Echo, which I admit I thought was gonna kinda be a gimmick, but boy was I wrong about that. Smooth Echo is actually a game changer in a lot of ways. The echo effect is dang near every open format DJ standard transition, and we can argue later about the pros and cons of that, but by creating an entirely separate echo effect augmented from the main effects section, freedom is returned to DJs to creatively use the effects section throughout the whole mix, and not just as an easy transition maker. The other huge feature unique to the S11 is having dedicated control of the third and fourth virtual decks in Serato. Many DJs won't find a need for this extra functionality, but it is revolutionary for those that will. I break down both of these features in my S11 review, so peep that if you want to learn more. Both mixers feature a proprietary crossfader, which is the newest edition of the Magvel Pro in the S11 and the Mag 4 fader in the 72 MK2. As a crossfader, they do their crossfader thing with as much or as little slope and cut in as you need. But there are a couple key distinctions. The first thing to notice, of course, is the feel when you're hitting clicks. I think this is the best Rane fader ever. I also think this is the best Pioneer fader ever. And if you've never used one or the other, this next statement may not mean much, but both faders retain all of their respective signature response that you've come to expect, while greatly tightening the overall tolerances. This means the energy from every click feels directly transferred into moving the carriage along the rails. It isn't lost in vibration throughout the mechanism. Folks may have a tactile preference, but I think it's only that, as these faders basically perform identically. The S11 and the 72 MK2 have external tension knobs, and the faders on the Rane have additional tension adjustment underneath the carrier. This becomes especially useful when you realize the 72 uses the Mag 3 and Mag 4 for the channel faders as well. The S11 only has one Magvel Pro with a crossfader, but that doesn't really do anything to diminish the channel faders, as they feel and perform without flaw. Again, here is the biggest difference between the OG 72 and the Mark II, and that's with the addition of the external crossfader tension knob and the upgrade to the Mag 4 faders throughout the box. Many DJs will find those to be passable differences that may not justify a cost discrepancy between the iterations, and you can always upgrade the faders to the Mag 4 at any time if you want. The pads on both these units feel great, so you really can't go wrong with either. Preferentially, I like the shape and size of the S11 pads, and that lends itself to preferring the spacing of them as well. The actual performance of the pads is equally good, with the Akai pads on the 72 having a slightly squishier feel than the S11 pad bed. The pad mode buttons are even squishier still and offer a less confident response than the snickety click of the hard plastic buttons on the S11. The use of different materials and shapes between these button sets is a significant, though easily overlooked touch. The S11 has 4 modes per channel, independent of each other, each with 4 layers of function. The 72 has 5 modes per independent channel, each with 3 layers of control. Most of the pad modes are the same, and the S11 does have a couple more user modes, but the 72 has some unique modes like the pad effects and less so with the fader effects. Scratch Bank premiered on the S11 but is now available on the 72, but the S11 at this time still does have the lock on the combo pad modes. Both units have lots of effects and plenty of ways to control them, and since the effects are at the very center of the 72, the board clearly values this section. And it should, as it's vast, varied, and deep. There are 2 effects banks, each with 3 software effects and a dedicated hardware effect. Once you learn the required sequences of button taps and encoder twists to use everything here, it sounds great and is perfectly effective, but none of it feels particularly efficient. By contrast, the S11 has all of the effect controls banded together in a horizontal stripe across the center. No control is really more than 2 presses away, and not just here, but in every section of the board. As far as effect quality goes, they both sound good. But in my opinion, the Pioneer just sounds great. Now, I'm not really saying anything new here, and I certainly don't want to disparage Rane Flex effects. They've definitely come a long way, and the newest modeling of the Echo sounds better than it ever has, and I really like the Beat Breaker effect. But on the effects I use most, which is the Echo and Reverb, the Pioneer has a clarity and presence that I just don't hear on the Rane. But that's just like my opinion, man. I'm perfectly happy with the sound quality of both effect units. And I have to give the 72 propers on the aluminum paddles. They're really solid and the action is high quality due to the weighted resistance. It makes them feel far more expressive in use than the plastic clacking that comes from banging the paddles around on the S11. On the business of output sound quality from these mixers, both are 24-bit 48K, and they both represent the audio passed through them superbly. In short, the Rane sounds like a Rane and the Pioneer sounds like a Pioneer. In long, the 72 has a great, full-bodied and warm signature to its sound. And the S11 is sharp and clean, with a crispy upper register and great instrument separation even in the low mids. But, like so much between these two, it really comes down to preference. I'd be willing to wager a fair sum that the vast majority of DJs wouldn't be able to tell the difference if they were simply listening, and I might be among them. So, needless to say, you're good either way. And finally, the centerpiece of these mixers is the built-in touchscreen. On the whole, both of these screens are great, and the way they fit the workflow is similar in result, though accomplished differently. For starters, the S11 operates from a main menu, where users can move between 6 points of control and a settings menu, compared to 4 different screen modes plus settings on the 72. The waveform screens for both these mixers offer up smooth and responsive visuals, surrounded by on-screen buttons with some playback information. Both share track tempos, loop lengths, and some sync and key controls as well. A difference here is the S11 does show some universal effects information across the bottom of the screen, while all effects information on the 72 is on its own page. Another important feature of the screen is library browsing, and both do different things well here. The 72 has capacitive browse encoders, which means as soon as you touch one, the library view comes up and stays up as long as you're making contact with the knob. This is a brilliant and thoughtfully considered application of this technology in a way that makes total sense the instant you use it, and consequently makes browsing on the S11 feel really clunky and off-putting by comparison. You have to physically turn the library browse encoder to switch the view on the S11 over to browse, which means you're moving from the song that's currently highlighted, and the browse will only stay on screen for a couple seconds once you stop scrolling, so you better choose quick or switch all the way over to the dedicated library view. I also like how the Rane displays crate hierarchy and uses little icons. This goes a long way to make the library browsing on screen feel like it does on the computer. Another brilliant design on the Rane is how the pad information displays across the bottom of the screen when changing modes. You can even tap it to pin the info box there as long as you want. Cue point timing, sample names, beat subdivisions, all of it's incredibly useful to have when you want it. Both screens feature a dedicated XY touch effects mode, and they're equally good sounding and fun to use. Where I might prefer the S11 is with how it displays the song metadata while you're browsing. The text is quick and easy to read, and I like the way the information is laid out a little bit better. I do like the 72 expanded view, but the track time should be moved over to the right in order to make the boxes slightly smaller. The S11 does have 2 additional modes on screen. The first is called Touch MIDI, which is 4 banks of on-screen buttons, which is used to control a whole slew of things and can be remapped to whatever software functions you choose. This and the extra MIDI pad modes is how the S11 is able to make up for having fewer hardware controls than the 72. Lastly, the S11 also has a screen mode to control virtual decks 3 and 4, and does so extensively and masterfully. Over to the 72, the screen is multi-touch, so you can pinch and zoom on your waveforms, but I haven't found much use aside from that. And actually, zooming in on the waveform seems to be where the difference in screen quality shows itself most glaringly, as the 72 screen appears to have a lower refresh rate than the S11. Some users are going to have a gripe here, and it does make the Pioneer easier and a little more enjoyable to look at by comparison, but the Rane is more than capable and perfectly fine in use. The screens and their function, like nearly every other aspect of these two mixers, are comparatively different by only the smallest of margins, much of which is subjective. Every feature will be of more or less importance to each individual user, and every DJ watching this will surely weight each mixer's strengths and weaknesses differently than I have. Attributes like layout and workflow can't really be objectively qualified, and a similar way to say maybe is having a favorite color. Lots of people have that same favorite color, some people are neutral or indifferent to it, and some people won't understand why you like it at all. But that's the beauty of it. We have options. And as I found often with these mixers, there are multiple ways to accomplish the same task. So all of my opinions here should be taken with a big old grain of salt. So as different as these mixers might feel to me subjectively, their feature sets and overall performance are objectively identical with few exceptions. And I would be a very happy little DJ to have either of these at the center of my setup. These are the 2-channel flagship models for each company, and as such are absolutely incredible pieces of kit. But as consumers and artists, we have to honestly consider our needs. It's easy to get the gas from time to time, no third bass, and if you're like my friend DJ Lockstar, it's really just a way of life. But suffice it to say, there's nothing I found on either mixer that will make you a good DJ if you aren't already. And the other, probably more important side of that coin is there's nothing in particular on these mixers that you need to be a good DJ. If you have the means, either one of these machines will offer you all the music mixing joy you care to squeeze from it. But dropping 2 racks on a mixer isn't a prerequisite to being dope. Outside of a couple EQable channels and a crossfader, everything else on these and the other mixers is basically just providing you additional ways to put on a song, affect the playback some way, and turn it up so people can hear you. And while that is DJing in its rawest form, the innovations and features implemented here can change a DJ's fundamental mindset from asking the question, what functions do I need to have in order to play music, to what kind of music can I create with all the functions that I have? And when you start asking yourself the latter, you know it's probably time to step up to the big leagues. Whichever you pick, the Rane 72 and Pioneer S11 will provide an unprecedented palette of tools from which to work, play, and make music. When you're ready to get after it, hit up Deckademics.com/shop to cop your favorite flagship model. We offer a ton of DJing production gear from turntables and mixers to MIDI controllers and studio monitors, and we greatly appreciate the consideration when you're in the market to level up. You can follow me everywhere at Hand Lex and follow the school at Deckademics. Please like and subscribe if you're rocking with us, and do me a favor by sharing these videos and telling your friends about it if you like what we got going on over here. As always, you can't download practice, so you better get to it. Peace, y'all.